exactly.
very rigid. So.
I like those key differences. And to sum it up, when the way I explain it to people is, if anyone has ever raked leaves or shoveled snow or swept a floor, with just those simple tools, chop wood, carry water, that is microdosing. Macrodosing would be using the big broom, the blower, the leaf blower, or the snow blower. That's macrodosing. So, a much more of a intense experience, much more of an intense experience afterwards, with integrating what you hopefully have learned in that process. Where the microdosing, you can, like what Karina said, you can go about your day with just a little bit more amplification, a little bit more enhancement in your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, less triggered, getting those like real time, I call them real time downloads, with the real time hopeful healing. It's like, oh, Sean Merrick is one of our guests on here, and one of our associates as well. And he explains it in a way of, when that feeling comes, whether it's creativity or focus or some of the other days, Brian, I'm not a crier. I don't cry. And the microdoses made me cry. And I said, well, apparently you are a crier and you should cry. So sit with why you're crying and ask yourself why you haven't cried. The mushroom is clearly trying to tell you something. So that is one of those like real-time downloads that you can really sit in that quiet contemplation and learn a lot about yourself, instead of resisting it. And we all know what happens when we resist being uncomfortable. That can very easily transfer into what we like to think as depression. So little riff on that. And what are pitfalls that people should know about when starting microdosing? Can it make people crazy per se? And everybody, we're not here to talk about, all the woo-woo and all the benefits. And, it is very trending and it's a big buzzword and a lot of people are curious about it. We want to really give you all value from both sides, so you can make enough of a discerning decision if a microdosing practice, journey, protocol is appropriate for you. So let's just get some of the pitfalls of microdosing out of the way.
Well, first I want to address, I've just seen a couple of questions pop up in the chat about SSRIs and MAOIs and antidepressants and other medications. So I want to address that, because that would be maybe would fall into that category of pitfalls in microdosing. There is a way in which SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antagonize or block certain receptors. Let me just think. Yeah, I'll answer it this way. So there are certain receptors in the brain. They're called 5-HT2A receptors. And basically the way SSRIs are thought to work is they block them in order to create a situation where there's more free-floating serotonin in the brain available at the various synaptic uptake sites. And what that is thought to translate into is an elevated mood, less depression. What we know about hallucinogenic substances, psychedelics, and plant medicines with psychedelic properties is that they bind to these receptors and interact with serotonin, which is a natural psychotropic. Psychotropic meaning it interacts with the brain chemistry and the mind and our kind of psychoactive abilities. It's one of the innate psychotropics that we have in the brain and many other places throughout the body. In fact, it's synthesized in the gut. And because they have this kind of competitive nature, psychedelics and SSRIs, for these particular receptors, sometimes when people take psychedelics, the effect is very, very minimal or none at all, because those receptor sites are already basically being blocked by the SSRIs. So MAOI's opposite issue. There's again, I won't get too technical, but there's an effect of too much serotonin flooding the body, which can result in serotonin syndrome, which can be a deadly condition. Microdosing, again, there's very, very little research on this. From the anecdotal evidence that's out there, microdosing doesn't tend to carry the same dangers as macrodosing in those regards. I'm not gonna go on record as saying, go ahead and try it, it's safe. Again, that requires, oversight and a very personal and kind of customized assessment and protocol. But in general and in theory, microdosing doesn't have the same dangers as macrodosing in that regard. One of the things that happens oftentimes with microdosing is people don't know just how much to take for it to be a microdose for them. So they think that they're gonna just go about their day and do what they need to do, and then all of a sudden they find that they can't walk anymore. They can't get into their car and drive somewhere because they're just way too internal and there's so much going on. So my advice around that is to just let that first day and the first time you try it, and maybe even your first time with any substance, be at home on a day off, with a friend or a facilitator nearby, so that you can really see how it affects you, because it's going to be different for different people with different substances and at different times. Sometimes our bodies are a lot better at detoxing. Sometimes detox pathways are not optimized and something's creating a little bit of a backup, and the effect or the toxicity is different. So those are probably the two main things that I would say to keep in mind when microdosing. Also, it's illegal in most places. It's a Schedule I substance. Mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, peyote, ketamine's been legalized in most places in the world. But just be really mindful of where you are in the world and what some of the regulations are around that. Anything else you can think of, Brian?
Yeah, I was just kind of internally laughing because I've definitely been that person, the old oops, that wasn't a microdose, which is actually my next question. I'm sure most people have seen the meme floating around. That wasn't a microdose, referring to people who get the dosages wrong. My mentor, Michael, would always say, that was just a forced vacation, Brian. You apparently needed it. If I ate too much edible that I thought was a 2.5 milligram edible and it was 25 instead because it was labeled wrong. So, just be extremely discerning, know your source. That's why I have my calendar on there. For anyone that wants that 30-minute discussion, your source is extremely a big part of that experience, and having a trusting, reliable source that understands the medicine that they're making, as well as being consistent, and frequent and with the ingestion of that medicine. And just to mirror what Karina said, is if you're a first timer, be mindful of, the setting, like where you're at. You're not going to, be out in public, or, that's kind of fun too. But being at home, comfortable, nice music, in a very comfortable space, and you don't have many responsibilities to take on that day, whether it's picking kids up at school or going to work, or any of the number of other things that we, fill our calendars up with, and then slowly adjust over time. Like, oh, okay, that wasn't such a big experience that I thought it would be. Now maybe I can take it and, go to work or go to my, other, social events and such. So that's what I really like about microdosing, is you can integrate it into your daily flow in your life, but always be discerning every single time, because that oops, it will happen, and it can, be very strenuous for a little while until, just don't resist. just surrender to that flow. So, what are, some of the common mistakes you think people make that lead to this isn't a microdose? Did I touch on that with, knowing your source, understanding if you're doing this yourself, have a kitchen scale, weigh it out, grind it out, weigh it out. The old Carpenter mantra is measure twice, cut once, weigh twice, ingest once. You can't undercook and overcook steak. That's what we say in the restaurant world a lot. So I think we touched on a lot of the common mistakes, but just be very discerning and mindful of what you're consuming. I know you don't like this word, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think people have the context to it. So describe the protocols that people use when microdosing. We like to use the word journey because, as you all know, I've learned everybody is different and every body is different and every human condition is going into this. Everyone on this call, we could take the same microdose capsule, the same dose, at the same time, and we're going in to have that similar experience, but all 106 of us are going to go into it with a much, much different perspective. So that's why protocol probably doesn't work, and you'll hear a lot of people use, the Fadiman protocol, the Stamets protocol, or any type of protocol out there for taking certain medicines. So we like to use the word journey. Karina might have a different one, but she got me to think about that. I don't like that word. So tell us why. Tell us why you don't like that word either, or maybe like why protocol isn't the most accurate word when we're talking about a microdosing protocol. I think it's just very like an umbrella term that people can contextualize, but let's like drop a little deeper and talk about, those protocols that people usually use, but also how we can reframe the word protocol to get people to shift their perspective. Like this is all about shifting perspectives, but a protocol is like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If, step 4A, go to step 5A, step 4B, go over here, like the flow chart. It's not that easy.
So I personally don't like the concept of protocol in certain situations. Certain situations require protocols and are very important. Again, I remind everybody here and invite you to kind of hold a multidimensional awareness, right? There's room for all of these things to happen and to coexist together. So context, right? In some cases, protocols are very important. When you're fixing a car, there's a certain rhythm and a certain step structure to, repairing your brakes, repairing a carburetor. When working with a human being, with a human psyche, with a human body, my approach and my philosophy, and I recognize not everybody agrees with this, and I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I'm sharing what I think. My approach is that because we are all so unique and everything that's happening in this organism changes from moment to moment to moment. Every cell in my body is adapting to circumstances, is adapting to my environment, which means I'm a different person 2 words ago, now. Taking all of that into consideration when working with something as incredibly mysterious as the human psyche and as the plant medicine world and as psychedelics is paramount, is foundational. I like to, I can definitely share that there are certain protocols that people use. So this is, again, from my clinical experience and what colleagues have shared, what I've read, that there tends to be a variation culturally, right? So the way shamanic or Amazonian shamans practice is going to be very different from the way Caribbean shamans practice, from the way North American shamans practice. There's going to be differences in terms of the different substances. So one of the protocols, that Medicine Box, for example, has created and is a proponent of, which actually has its roots in a lot of other researched as well as anecdotally documented approaches, is like a 90-day microdosing protocol. So that's basically taking a microdose every day or maybe every 2 to 3 days. A lot of protocols do revolve around timing of microdoses, which means, okay, daily or weekly schedule, for example, right? Again, there's a lot of room and I think a serious need for these approaches to be customized, because every single person heals at a different rate. Every single person responds differently. There might be a need to pause and integrate and assess. Maybe something, really major has happened in your life. You're not occurring in a laboratory setting without any external stimuli. In fact, that would be a major stressor of its own for a human being to be, isolated in that way. So in general, what I really like to, the message that I'd really like to get across is that in honor of the uniqueness of each individual being, and also in honor of ancient shamanic indigenous traditions around working with psychedelics and plant medicine, some of the protocols, I keep stumbling on that word, some of the protocols that have been created have also come out of a deep communion with the plant and guidance from the plant itself. So I said earlier in the seminar and the webinar that plants have their own consciousness, their own intentionality. So when the plant is actually asked or listened to as that guide, then those answers tend to reveal themselves. And this is in fact the way, it's very much public knowledge. This is in fact the way that humans have discovered how to work with plants, and particularly psychedelic plants from ancient times, is that they tuned into the wisdom of the plant and learned from it. So that may not be, a comfortable perspective. A lot of people really want to just know, what do I do? What is step 1? What is step 2, step 3? My advice would be to work with a trusted practitioner, because I don't think that it should be as universally applied as this is what you do and this is what everybody does. I don't think that's safe. I don't think it's honoring of us, of our plants.
I agree with that. And you touched on the 90 days protocol, and considering this is my 10 years of sobriety, when 10 years ago, when I went into the worldwide 12-step program, the protocol, or let's use suggested use. The suggested practice there was to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And of course I was like, what the hell? Why am I going to 90 meetings in 90 days? Why are we reading the same preamble? Why are we talking about these same 12 steps and 12 traditions? Why am I hearing everyone talk about the same thing? Is because it gently and gradually, like that rake, remember the rake analogy, it just keeps gradually working on your psyche over time. So that, again, is hard for people to compute because of the conditioning of our society. We want instant gratification, and the mind just always wants to know. It's always trying to figure things out instead of just, okay, let me just surrender. Day 1, you might have some revelations. Day 2, that transition period, you may be feeling a little bit of the afterglow, but maybe down a little bit because emotions have been stirred up. And then, the 3rd day, when you're completely free from chemical intervention, you might really feel that afterglow of, wow, this is what it's supposed to feel like being my whole happy self, and then start that next 1 day on, 2 days off, or leading up to 4 days on, 3 days off. I like to do 5 days on, 2 days off, but I will say after about the third, fourth day, I do feel a little bit irritable. And that's probably from the depletion of the serotonin. So, make sure you take those transition days and those off days seriously. So there is a big question in here from Art Mitchell that I want to get to at the end, because he does talk about a little bit about the science there. So how long do people usually stay on a microdosing protocol, and could I build up a dependency? I think I kind of touched on that, but maybe Karina, you have some things to add there.
That's a great question. What I've seen is that people will either set a kind of a finite amount of days for themselves to experience a microdosing journey, or they will do so continuously, kind of in the way that you just described, where they sort of monitor their reaction and take on days, take off days. Again, it varies. It's a very individual choice and depending on someone's intention. But either way is fine. What I generally recommend, if people are kind of going in this direction and they don't have their own experience or familiarity, is to start with something like, to start with one, first of all. And then to see if maybe a week or a month or, like a 90-day, something like that, kind of a practice or a commitment, or, call it a discipline, maybe commit to that journey and supplement it with a lot of journaling, integration therapy, make it a really intentional and conscious experience that is sort of in the safety of the container of a finite amount of dates, kind of taking out a chunk of your life, a chunk of your year, to undergo this personal transformative experience, much in the way people will go on a retreat or do a cleanse or a detox. That tends to create a really healthy boundary and containment around the experience. And once there is that kind of safety and structure, for a lot of people, that tends to yield the best results, because it's not just another thing that they don't have any control over and that's going to kind of